Really excited to join you this evening to talk about this very important topic. Today, we'll be talking about how to select a quality early learning center for your child. So we'll be going over 3 different topics, culminating in reviewing the checklist that we've put together that will be emailed to you at the end of this presentation about how exactly you go about making your decision on where you send your child for early childhood education. Before going into that in detail, we want to start a little bit at a high level and talk about why should your child or your children attend an early learning center. We're going to get into what an early learning center even is. Secondly, given that the coronavirus pandemic is still very much with us and still very much an important thing to consider when selecting an early childhood education center, we're going to be talking about COVID-19 safety measures that should be implemented at a program. Thirdly, we'll then be going into the nuts and bolts in very simple terms of how you go about selecting that center. What should you be looking for? What sort of questions should you be asking? What are indicators of quality, et cetera? And for those of you that have questions, we'll be saving time at the end of the presentation to go through all of your questions. So if you have a question, please enter it in the chat, and then Unbreen will moderate sort of a Q&A session, and I'll do my best to answer all the questions that everyone has. Great. So first things first, why should your children attend an early learning center? So I'd like to start with a quote from Maulana Hazri Imam about the significance of early childhood education. So the quote reads, "The way in which children are educated in their earliest years is a key which can unlock the doors of opportunity for the rest of their lives." So, Maulana Hazri Imam has talked about this several times. It's still a priority. It's also one of the reasons why we want to have this webinar, to make sure that everyone in the Jamaat has the tools they need to evaluate early learning centers in their area and hopefully select the best one for their child. So what is an early learning center? So early learning center is sort of a catch-all phrase that we've come up with to describe programs that provide education for children outside of their own home before the age of kindergarten. So everywhere from birth, infant care, all the way to 5 years old. Other terms that you may see in reference to early learning center, these are sort of all in the same category. So other terms that all mean the same thing are preschool. You may see the word Montessori a lot, child care center. Another common one is daycare. However, with the term daycare, want to caution you a little bit because that can be a very loose term. Sometimes daycares can describe very high quality programs that offer both a caring environment and also an academic and nurturing environment. Sometimes daycare can just refer to a sort of more of a babysitting type service. So if you see someone that is advertising themselves as a daycare primarily, please look into that closer, as that can mean a multitude of things. But again, the common terminology is early learning center, preschool, Montessori, or child care center. Those are the most common that we see. Great. So what does research say about the importance of quality early childhood education? This data that I'm going to present to you is from the First 5 Years Fund. So what the First 5 Years Fund, it's a government-backed research fund that also has private fundraising as well. So for example, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, University of Pennsylvania, Harvard University, all of these sort of academic research institutions have all contributed to this fund as well, along with private donors. And what they did is that they spent considerable amount of research and effort and money, frankly, into figuring out the true impact of education in the first 5 years of a child's life, hence the name First 5 Years Fund. So I want to go through their 9 sort of data points that they've sort of, all this research culminates into these data points, which I think are very powerful. So number 1, children who enter kindergarten behind their peers academically are more likely to stay or fall behind. So again, speaking to the quality and speaking to how important it is to start this early. Number two, high quality early childhood education reduces attendees' timidity and improves attentiveness. So that speaks to the social and cognitive development that happens at a high quality early childhood education program or early learning center. Thirdly, childcare quality has a long-term effect on children's cognitive and socio-emotional development through kindergarten and beyond. Fourth, high quality early learning programs aimed at disadvantaged children help close the achievement gap, increasing IQ scores by up to 10 points. So if you think about how IQ is measured, 130 IQ is considered, a genius. 100 IQ is considered extremely smart for the average person. And if you think about increasing IQ scores of 10 points, that's quite significant, right? If you know how IQ is measured. And again, that just shows how important it is and the return that you are getting in terms of your child's advancement by placing them in a quality early learning center. Number five, preschool reduced the percentage of children repeating a grade by 15%. Again, I think that's another very powerful and very incredible statistic. So four more here. Number six, preschool lowered the rate of special education placement by 10%. Number seven, early learning and care increases high school graduation rates 14%. So it's quite amazing how you can trace, again, the earliest stages of a child's development, birth to 5, all the way through success in high school and graduation rates. Number 8, early language skills, the foundation for reading ability and school readiness, are acquired and built during the first years of life. Children who are exposed to reading during the first years of life are much more likely to learn to read on schedule. Number 9, when a young child enters kindergarten ready for school, there is an 82% chance that child will master basic skills by age 11, compared to a 45% chance for children who are not school ready. So almost double the chance of a child to master basic skills by 11 who are kindergarten ready. So who go through a pre-kindergarten program, learn the basic skills, and are well set up to sort of take off from there. Great. So one of the questions that we get a lot is how long should children attend an early learning center per week? So there is some research and some studies on this. Essentially, many of the studies sort of conclude the following. By 18 months, at least your child should, again, from the studies, should attend childcare, early learning center, at least 3 to 10 hours a week. By 3 years old, at least 15 hours a week. And by 4 years old, they should be attending a full-time preschool, pre-kindergarten program. So think of a full day, almost like school. And I think it's very important also to emphasize consistency here as well. Studies also talk about not just one day a week necessarily. So say it's 15 hours per week, for example. It's better to spread that out over the course of a week and have more of a schedule and routine versus just, 2 days or something like that. So, if you can do 3 hours a day for 5 days, that's great. At age 3, again, these are minimums. So if you want to do full-time care for 3 years old, that's perfectly fine. And honestly, I think that may even be better. And the last thing I want to emphasize here is, while important, early childhood care and education is more than just preparing for kindergarten, than just the academic piece of it. It also aims at holistic development of a child's social, emotional, cognitive, and physical needs in order to build a solid and broad foundation for lifelong learning and well-being. So beyond just the pure academics, the numeracy, the literacy, it's also important for these children to be exposed to other children of their same age, to start making friends, to start having social experiences, to start learning how to raise their hand and participate in class, to start sharing, things of that nature. Those are all beyond just purely academics, but all extremely important for development. Great. So now we've established the importance of attending an early learning center. However, something that's likely in the back of all of our minds, given that we've been in a pandemic for almost a year now, is what COVID-19 safety measures should be in place at your prospective early learning centers. So what we're going to go through here is the CDC best practices around what kind of questions and what sort of practices an early learning center should be implementing. I can tell you at the early learning centers that we own and that we run, we do all of these procedures, and parents are very thankful, and also that's what they look for. So you should be looking for similar things. So before talking about the specific procedures, I'd like to talk a little bit about what COVID-19's impact has been on children. There's still many studies going on that are ongoing, and I'm sure in the next few years we'll have more conclusive evidence as to the quantification or exact impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, preliminary research suggests the following. So number one, we've seen evidence of increased stress in children, and that could come from, again, a learning from home environment where both parents are working from home. Maybe a parent lost their job, maybe things are less stable in the finances. A child will detect all of those things. They may not know the exact reason for those things, but they can detect stress at home. And if everyone is at home, we've seen, or studies have shown, that stress amongst children has been increasing. Secondly, regression in social development. So not being around children of your same age, right? So again, you forget those skills, or you never develop those skills. Again, like sharing, making friends, introducing yourself to different children, raising your hand to participate in class. These are all very, very important social, emotional, developmental milestones. Thirdly, less familiarity with structure. So one thing that's very common in very high quality early learning centers is a school-like structure, even at the pre-K age, mimicking what it's going to be like to go to school one day. And one thing that's lost in a home environment, unless you're very regimented, is having that schedule, which is very important for children. Number four, on the right-hand side here, reduced exposure to pre-numeracy and pre-literacy concepts. So, parents have had to juggle their careers, being a teacher, all of those things. It's very likely that, some of these concepts could have been learned earlier, and an issue with not being in an early learning center is that those opportunities could have been missed. The last is just an overall reduction in kindergarten readiness. So while these are all obviously, unfortunate impacts of COVID-19 on children, these aren't things that we cannot recover from. That being said, making sure that the center that you're enrolling your child in is safe is very important, and also should factor in making that decision to help your child sort of overcome some of these obstacles that research may point to, and closing that gap. Great. So these 5 categories that we'll go through are the 5 major categories that the CDC has set out for early childhood education centers and early learning centers to adhere to reduce the chance of transmission of COVID in the center. Luckily, according to the numbers and research, if you follow these practices, if the school is following these practices, transmission rates in childcare centers are actually quite low. In our centers where we're doing all of these processes, we've seen very few instances of COVID transmission, and that's been great. And our parents obviously appreciate this. So we'll go through these 5 categories, and also what specifically the school should be doing within those 5 categories. So These items will be provided to you in the checklist as well. You do not need to write these down. However, when you receive the checklist, look over them and ask about them. And the questions are also provided to you in the checklist as well. So number one, the school needs to have social distancing strategies in place. So what does that mean? So number one is limiting mixing of children in common areas. So while it's not possible to expect a group of 3-year-olds to maintain 6 feet of distance, obviously, it is possible, however, for the school to make sure that different age groups and different classrooms are not mixing. So for example, the 4-year-olds and the 3-year-olds are not using the playground at the same time. They're not using the cafeteria if the school has one at the same time. If the school has a science lab or something like that, or an enrichment area, they're not mixing. There's one classroom at a time, okay? Very important. Secondly, spacing, seating, and nap time mats 6 feet apart where possible. We all know about the 6 feet. We've been practicing it now for a year. These are ways that child care centers need to be doing it in their centers as well. Number two is intensified cleaning. The most important thing here is masks for all staff and parents during drop-off. If you're a Texas parent, and I know in the news, there's been a lot of announcements about the governor rescinding the mask order here in Texas. However, the high quality operators or the operators that are following the CDC guidelines should still be requiring masks for their staff and parents, regardless of that announcement. And many of them are, but be sure to ask. Number two, having a plan to routinely clean, sanitize, and disinfect surfaces and objects that are frequently touched, and especially toys and games. And then number three is promoting hand washing. So third, this one is something that is you may be unfamiliar with, and that is having a modified pickup and drop-off schedule. So what does that mean? So in normal times, you would park, walk your child into the school, sign in on a computer or a sheet or something, and then walk your child to the class. However, in COVID, the CDC has recommended modifying those procedures where that entire check-in process happens outside the school. And then a teacher from the child's classroom comes to the front area when the child is signed in, then takes the child to their classroom. The reason why that is the updated procedure is we're trying to limit the amount of different people inside the building. So parents, for example, are not allowed inside of our facilities unless there is an emergency. Keeping everything outside, again, just reduces the chance of any transmission inside the school. Number four is doing a health screening upon arrival. So asking, are you symptomatic? Have you had a fever in the last however many days, headache, et cetera? So good quality centers will have some kind of check-in sheet or some kind of check-in process where they'll ask you those questions, and then a temperature screen before entering the facility. And then number five, ask the school what their plan is if someone is sick. How do they clean the area if someone is sick? Do they quarantine staff? Do they close classrooms if there's a case of COVID in the building? Those are all good questions to understand if they actually do have a plan if someone is sick. Great. So transitioning from the safety and COVID-19 sort of considerations here, now I'd like to talk about how exactly do you evaluate an early learning center before deciding to enroll? And also, how do we use the checklist? So there's 3 steps to the checklist. The first step is sort of your homework, if you will. Number 1 is understanding your child and your family's needs. So what kind of learning environment? Does your child need perhaps extra attention in a specific area? Those are things to ask about. Family needs, budget, obviously. Commute, is it convenient? Is it in your area? And is it well reviewed in the community as well? Secondly, once you've taken those factors into account, make a list of those potential centers in your area and also get recommendations from folks in your area. And very importantly, check the online reviews. We'll talk about where to check later in the presentation as well. Step 2 is also a little bit of homework, is research potential centers in advance and check state licensing history for the safety record. We'll show you how to do that. We'll also show you where to go, but that is critical. Not enough parents know how to get the safety information or where to even look, and we'll talk a little bit about how to do that. Then the second part of step 2 is once you've done that, then narrow down the longer list based on your research, safety record, online reviews to a shorter list and call and schedule a tour. Definitely always tour a school that you're considering enrolling in. You can ask more questions. It's really where the checklist is more helpful. And if they're not doing tours during the day because of COVID-19 protocol, which some schools still are not allowing, ask to do a virtual tour or ask to do a tour after hours, either before they open or most likely after they've closed. Very likely that the director or a member of the staff will stick around to give you a tour because you know, they're happy to do that in case you want to enroll. So step 3, tour the school, use the checklist, and then sit down with the director or the manager and use the quality ECD checklist to record observations and notes. Once you have all of your notes consolidated for each school, discuss your findings with your family, and then make your choice and enroll. Great. So what is the checklist? So this is a screenshot of what the checklist looks like. We have developed 2 checklists, one for the age between birth and 2 years old, and one between 3 and 5 years old. Please, depending on the age of your child, be aware of this and use the correct checklist because the questions are slightly different because obviously there are different developmental milestones and things to ask about depending on the age of the child. You'll be emailed both of these checklists at the end of the presentation for all of those who have registered. And before visiting the center, make sure you do the pre-visit research, which we'll go through, and print out the checklist. So you should have, if you're visiting 5 centers, you should have 5 printed out checklists to make sure you're taking that along with you and to stay organized. Great. So we're going to walk through every part of the checklist. So the first part, again, will be the pre-visit online research and safety record check. The second part will be the actual tour, checking things off while you're walking around the school. The third will be the follow-up questions, the third section. So when you sit down with the director and ask more detailed questions, so we have a list of those questions for you there. And then number 4, in that same sit down, we also have a separate section about COVID-19 in case they didn't cover something and you'd like to hear more. So we have a list of questions about that as well. Great. So part 1, the pre-visit online research and safety record. So the first thing that you will do is fill out the basic school information. So the name of the school, the address, and then the date of your tour that you've scheduled, as well as if it's licensed from the state. And we'll show you how to check for that. You also will write down the tuition cost per week and the tuition cost per month, just so you can keep your budget in mind. So the most important part of this section is really here at the bottom, the online research. And please budget about an hour to an hour and a half to make sure you're doing all of this research, okay? And a lot of this research can happen either on the school's website, on review websites, or other online resources that may speak about the school. So for example, if they have a Facebook page or something like that. So number 1, is the program accredited by an external agency? So there's plenty of accrediting agencies out there for curriculum. There's NACE, there's Advanced ED, there's Cognia. It's not critical that they have one of these accreditations, but it is a helpful sign of quality potentially if they have an accreditation. So usually on their website, you'll see accredited and then a name next to it or a sticker of the accreditation. or you can call and ask, and I'm certain they'll have an answer. They'll know yes or no if they are. If they are, write down what it is so you can compare between other schools. Number two, what is the name of the curriculum? So this is more for informational purposes and understanding, again, if you're looking at 5 different schools, to get a sense of how the different curriculums compare. So it's really up to you to do the research on the specific curriculum and what you read about in terms of how you think that fits your child's needs. There are plenty of great options across curriculums. So for example, just because you've heard of Montessori doesn't mean it's necessarily the best. For example, Montessori has been around since the 1800s, and it was actually developed originally as a way to educate children with special needs, and then it transformed into a theory for educating all children. It's based on independence. However, active learning is another curriculum. Reggio Emilia, Vytrovsky, there's so many different types of curriculum, all of which have their positives and negatives. So just because someone has Montessori on their building doesn't necessarily mean it's the best. You need to do your research. There are plenty of great Montessori programs, however. So I'm not discouraging you. I'm just encouraging you to do deeper research than just relying on the name alone. Thirdly, how frequently do teachers provide updates to parents? So you'll see that on the website usually. So we have a newsletter, we have a quarterly newsletter, a monthly newsletter, we have conferences. That information is usually available on the website. If it's not, you can always call as well or ask on the tour. Number 4, does the curriculum have a balance of activities? Art, music, physical, literacy, STEAM, etc. The way you can gather that from the website is usually they'll have an example of, usually they'll have a section for each program and have a description of what typically a day is like or something like that. So look for balance there. Lastly, for this column, does the school have a mobile app? Now it's becoming very, very popular where many schools will actually have an app that you can download and then they'll send you updates throughout the day. So they may send you pictures, they may tell you what your child had for lunch that day, what they're working on that day, etc. So, a lot of parents find that important. Also, the schools that are very transparent have that, and I think that's a great thing. So definitely look for that. And also web cameras. Again, very, very good thing to see. Some parents like being able to see that camera at all times. And do they limit your access? That's another question. Are you able to log in anytime you want, or you can only log in at certain times, or do you get logged out after 5 minutes? But firstly, does the school even have the cameras? I think that's the great place to start. And usually the website will mention that as a safety feature. Looking for the menu being posted online and seeing if the offerings are nutritious. So again, they'll usually post a sample menu. I would look at that. This is extremely important. I think it's probably the most important thing. Does the school have strong online ratings? So usually they'll have a Google business page and a Facebook page, maybe not a Yelp page, but usually one of those two, if not both. Look for schools that have a good amount of reviews and greater than 4 stars. Now, if you're moving to a new area and a school is brand new, you may not have that tool. However, it's a great first place to check. And if you see 100 reviews, 4 stars, you're likely to know that, okay, I should at least take a tour. And then lastly, again, as I mentioned, we'll talk about how to find this information. Consulting the state licensing website for safety. So usually, state licensing websites will have an inspection report or violation report where sometimes almost up to 10 years, you can go back and see what the safety history is of that school. Great. So secondly, how do you check the state licensing information? So here on the left-hand side, and this is in the checklist, we've provided links, and what we've done is we selected the states where the majority of our Jamaats in the US is. If you don't see your state here, so again, we have California, Florida, Georgia, Illinois, New York, Texas, and Virginia. If you don't see your state here, simply just Google your state's name and childcare regulation, and you'll usually, first or second link will be the link to one of these websites. So on these websites, if you click the link, there should be a search bar where you just type in either the name of the center or the address of the center, and then each center will have their own dedicated page. On that page, you'll usually see the capacity of the center, so how many children the center can safely care for, and then the safety history. So in that safety history section, usually, and in all these states, that's pretty much the case, usually they'll have a write-up of what the violations were. And they're usually quite detailed, actually. They'll tell you what happened, and they'll tell you how it was corrected. So if you see a school, every year you see 5 things there or 10 things there, that's a red flag. I would absolutely check this before visiting a school. Great. So let's talk about the checklist during the actual tour. So once you've done your online research and you've concluded that you'd like to visit the school, these are some things to look for when you're visiting. So again, I would have this printed out on either a clipboard or a notebook or something, and you can kind of sort of check these things off as you go. And if you don't see them, you can ask to see something. Each of these check marks is worth, we gave it a score of just 1 point. And then you can write the number of check marks in the top right, and that helps you stay organized and also compare. So we're going to go through each factor here. So number 1, looking for secure entry into the building. So what does that mean? Is the building locked at all times? It should be, the front door. So how do they let you in? Sometimes they buzz you in, or you can ring a doorbell or something like that, and someone will open the door for you. But look for secure entry. It shouldn't just be you can walk in whenever you want. Number 2, looking inside of the classrooms, is there ample space for students inside the classroom to play vigorously? So again, you're looking for a spacious classroom, and even if it's a smaller facility, you're looking for at least room for children to run around vigorously. If it looks like there are too many children in there or there's not enough space from a developmental point of view, that's not a great classroom in terms of design. 3, is there evidence of learning, fun, and engagement? So do you see art on the wall? Do you see projects displayed? Are the children smiling? Are they engaged? Are they actually listening to the teacher? Or do they just look like babysitting? And are the staff happy? Do they look overwhelmed? After this, are there at least 4 or 5 interest centers used, including an area protected from active play? So what does that mean? So in terms of high quality centers, the research shows that you need to have 4 or 5 very specific areas for different activities from a learning perspective. So for example, is there a dramatic play area? So what does that mean? So like a kitchen area or maybe a stage or something like that where children can act out certain things. That's dramatic play. Is there a reading area, a reading nook? Is there a place for circle time? Is there a place with desks and chairs for sitting down and maybe working on handwriting or something like that? So there needs to be, so these are all examples here. An area for blocks, for example. So when you're looking into a classroom, you need to look for 4 or 5 very clearly defined centers for different activities. Is there a clear and easy to follow schedule posted outside or inside the classroom for parents? So again, the best centers have sort of a school-like schedule. The older the child gets, the more there is a schedule, but there should still be some sort of schedule for each age group, even infant. And it should be posted and available for you. So if you don't see that, you should ask for it. Lastly, on this column here on the left-hand side, does the school use assessments such as observations, rating scales, or checklists to gauge developmental milestones? So one very popular assessment for younger children, birth to 2, is called the Ages and Stages Questionnaire, or ASQ. Some schools do that. Some schools have their own assessment. So you should be asking, hey, how do I know how my child is progressing at your school? Do you provide some sort of assessment? Usually they'll talk about that during the tour, but if they don't, I would ask about it. So here on the right-hand side, number 1, are there no visible safety hazards? So do you see toys that seem a little bit too small for the children in the room that could cause a choking hazard? Do the staff seem distracted? If you see a staff member staring at their phone, that's a very bad sign. Do you see tripping hazards? Are any of the doors blocked in case there's a fire drill or an actual emergency? After, are the bathrooms in the classroom, are there bathrooms in the classroom devoted for potty training? So we're relevant. So usually in our schools, for the older 2s or the younger 3-year-old classrooms, we have specific potty training facilities. You should ask the school about that. Many very high quality programs have potty training facilities. So if your child's in that age range, you should ask about that, or they should already point it out to you in the tour. This one's a really important one. Do the staff seem genuinely engaged in the classroom with the children? So again, that's really just looking at the staff, getting a sense of how they feel about working there, their engagement. Are they laughing? Are they smiling? Are they kind to the children, etc. Look at the playground. So after this one, does the outdoor area appear safe? Are there soft landing areas, ample shade, access to water? So what does that mean? So soft landing area, so you'll see some playgrounds that are gravel or concrete, and if a child were to fall off of a play structure, they could get seriously injured. So you need to make sure that there's grass out there or turf or some soft place for children to land, because accidents obviously do happen. Shade in hot climates, Florida, Texas, etc. Many good quality programs have shade structures, and just making sure that there's ample access to water outside, and also fences. Making sure that the playground is adequately fenced in if you're near a commercial area or a road or something like that. If the school serves food, or if they allow other food to be brought into this facility, they are required to have some sort of allergy policy. So if there's a cafeteria or in the classroom, if they eat in the classroom, allergies of the children should be clearly posted somewhere visible. So what is that supposed to look like? Usually you'll see a picture of the child and then the list of allergies below, or you'll see a folder, if they can't show the picture, covering that, where if you open it, you'll see the allergies. So look out for that. If your child is below 3 years old and wearing diapers in the 2s classroom or an infant classroom, look at the diaper changing area. Does it look clean? If they're changing a diaper while you're touring, are they sanitizing the diaper changing area right afterward? For the next child. Is there space and equipment for proper feeding of infants? So do they have bottle warmers? Do they have fridges to store breast milk? They need to have those facilities in place if they're feeding infants at the school. And then the last one is just a kind of a sense check. When you walk into the center, does it look clean and does it smell clean? That seems like common sense, but it's something that is a very good sort of sense check for the quality of the school once you walk in. So this is the simple checklist of when you're walking through the school. It's a one-pager where, again, you go through these items and check them off the list. I think it's a very good way to sort of stay organized, but also make sure you're looking at the most important things. So part 3, after you have completed the tour, ask to sit down in the director's office or with a director at somewhere in the school where you can have a follow-up conversation after the tour. So in this checklist, and there's another page full of questions as well, we have provided additional questions that you can ask following a tour. So these questions cover curriculum. So for example, asking, tell me about the benefits of your curriculum. Asking, at the end of the academic year, what can I expect my child to know? What milestones will they achieve? So asking questions like that. Secondly, there's additional safety questions. So talking about How do you handle behavior issues? What happens if there's what is the sick injury policy at your center if a child is sick or suffers an injury at the center? Thirdly, there's questions here about developmental milestones. And then finally, there's questions about student-teacher ratios. So ratios, what does that mean? So each state usually has a mandate of the amount of children you can have to the amount of teachers you can have. So for example, in an older classroom, a ratio might be 1 teacher for every 12 students. In a smaller classroom like infants, it might be 1 teacher to every 3 infants. The state licensing website will have those ratios, but you can ask about it as well. And like I said before, there are additional questions beyond just these in the checklist as well that you can refer to. And then finally are the COVID-19 safety questions. So going back to the presentation where we talked about the 5 areas to evaluate, this section has a list of all of those questions that you can ask if the tour did not sufficiently answer them. So make sure you go through all of these at the end of the tour, that you're satisfied with the answers and that they're following CDC best practices related to COVID-19 prevention. This is very important and should be thoroughly reviewed. Great. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Unbreen and kind of go through the question list, and happy to answer as many questions as we can.